Hello from beautiful Normandy, here standing in the race village of the Transat Jacques Vabre in Le Havre, France, with Charlie Enright, co-skipper of our brand new Imoca, Malama behind us. And Charlie, what's the plan for the day?
Plan for today is to walk the dock. There's 22 boats here, all with different features. We can talk a little bit about our boat and some of the differences between our boat and the other boats in the marina.
I remember when we were here a couple of years ago, and I think it was Hugo Boss that was in a pretty similar spot. And just walking around looking at all of the new designs and the new features, and obviously our boat being a little bit older, the differences were clear, but we are now the new boat. We are now the boat that has all the new stuff, and there's been no shortage of attention.
Yeah, I mean, two years ago we came here with an eye on the new design and what this boat would eventually end up being, and it's a pretty cool experience to walk the docks, 26 boats or whatever it was last time, and kind of take the parts that you like and kind of discard the parts that you don't like on a lot of the other platforms and see what the other naval architects are thinking. Yeah. Kind of what you see here today is kind of the manifestation of all those decisions that have been made over the course of 2 years. We're biased. We think we've made all the right decisions, but we haven't taken the time certainly to prove that yet. But this is the most unique boat in the fleet, certainly, being new, but also being kind of 2 years advanced on everybody else and being able to incorporate some of the design features that we saw succeed in the Vendée. Maybe we can just start in the back and walk forward. I mean, these rudders, first and foremost, are absolutely enormous. They're the longest, highest aspect rudders in the fleet. They seem to work great at speed. They don't seem to be great low speed for maneuvering, but that was really never part of the brief. Kind of moving forward, you can see that we've opted for a straight traveler for kind of a more active, precise trimming of the mainsail. You can see the enclosed cockpit, which is something that we worked really hard on, and I think you're seeing most of the fleet move that way, not only for aerodynamic reasons, but certainly for safety. You can see it's covered in solar panels, something that we picked up from some of the other boats. It's been a very effective means of charging. We have a very big cockpit because it was designed for crewed sailing in mind, with the future of this program being the ocean race. What else? We got a hydro generator here. So actually between the hydro generator and the solar, it's plausible in the future that we don't need any fossil fuel on board, which would be great. Being able to use the engine on demand for the purposes of safety, particularly in a crewed environment, is something that we'll probably never entirely forego, but we're trying to minimize the amount of fuel that we carry on board when we can. What do you want to talk about with the foils? Let's pull that bad boy off. We've done a lot of development with the foils. We did 4 total foils for 11.1, an asymmetric set, and then the set that you see on there right now, which are essentially the V3s. And we learned a lot in that process about everything from construction method, section shape, profile, shaft radius, sweep, camber, every aspect of the foil. I mean, we've changed so much. When we want the foil lifting, when we want the foil working in anti-leeway. Just sometimes it's mind-boggling because we've just changed so much and made so many advances. It's difficult to ascertain what changes brought the most performance, but we're proud of what we see here, definitely. They're probably the biggest foils in the fleet, even though you can't see that when they're totally retracted, which is actually I'm totally fine with.
We always talk about foil families.
Yep.
And is that the designer? Obviously, the hull itself is connected to the foils, but like, where from the beginning is the shape of the foil getting decided? Are you prioritizing certain conditions, certain speeds, certain sea state?
Yes. I mean, this foil comes from Guillaume's pen, and basically he takes feedback from us on the boat, and we work together on creating what you see here. The Imocas in the last 4 years have reached ridiculous speeds, reaching in particular, but you see the boats in the Southern Ocean and they're pushing water at 16 knots. And is that a function of only having one person on board and an autopilot that desires apparent wind aft, or is it because the foils just haven't been able to produce the performance? So we focused on on VMG downwind for these foils, and the boat traditionally sails flat. So we have a big shaft, we have a flat tip, and in those conditions the foil's working in lift and in Z and trying to get the boat out of the water versus working too hard in anti-leeway. So
and then one of the other things that is talked about a lot is the profile, right? Like I can see it really well from here, but it's something that's not so easily visible from afar in photos or video or anything like that. But as it pertains to the rest of the fleet, what makes these foils so much different? We always talk about how much bigger they are, but how does that manifest itself?
Yeah, I mean, basically, a flat foil or a foil without a lot of section shape is low drag, and it gets its lift essentially through span, by its size. If it's not going to have a ton of camber in it. While we were building these foils, they changed the rules, so everything had to be, in essence, smaller. So we had to derive the lift from somewhere else. So we actually have a fair bit of camber in the foil, which helps lift it out of the water. But then the distribution of that camber over the span of the tip has a lot to do with the cavitation and ventilation that we've seen in some of our previous foils and that we don't see in this set. As we walk the dock, you'll see a bunch of other boats with fences on their foils, and that's not a thing for us. We figured out how to deal with that over the course of the other foils that we're lucky to be able to test in 2020.
What's the strategy?
The bowsprit itself is it's a single bowsprit, which is a little atypical in France. Some of it comes down to personal preference, just kind of working on the sprit, and these days that's me. And I prefer a bigger dance floor than most of these guys operate with. And then the arrow is it's a little ambiguous as to what's better. When you look at the front of the boat, the biggest difference is the shape of the bow. And I mean, there's plenty of volume up there. I mean, you got max circumference a meter back from the bow, which is kind of part of the rule. But then we got a lot of other things going on too. You see a lot of spatula, which is kind of the curved nature of the axis of the boat, and that's in there to help propel the boat out of the water as it's cruising down waves. So you don't stuff the bow, and you can keep those high average speeds when you're running downwind. But you don't want to sacrifice too much waterline because it's important for going upwind. It's important for reaching. So we tried to get the bow up and out of the water a little bit through the spatula, but then also through these, through the flare, through the chine, through kind of the reverse camber that you see on the sheer there. It's something that powerboats have been using for a long time. It creates a really unique shape relative to other boats, and based on our small sample size of on the water time, it seems to be working so far. What? So we got the quorum here. The quorum's designed by 1K. There's basically 3 or 4 architects in the fleet: VPLP, Guillaume, Juan, and Sam Manwart. And you see a lot of differences across, their various platforms. The quorum looks like a complete monster. It's got a ton of volume. It's got this concave deck in the front, which we have elements of. The bow is completely different, for sure. Straight lines, no spatula. They got the two barrel bowsprit. The foils essentially lift up through the hull, but it does give you a very vertical exit on the shaft, which is something I do like.
New foils.
New foils, yeah. Foils are complex. There's a lot of twists. There's a lot of sweep. There's not a ton of camber. They got these winglets probably for the purposes of cavitation and a little ventilation. These guys, they sail the boat well. They run a great program. So it'll be cool to see how they go in this next race.
I find their cockpit with the same sort of spacious approach as the Jacques Vabre to be appealing in a lot of ways. But when you look at it from here, it's hard to believe it's the same class, same size. It looks, like you said, monstrous.
They're ready to go to action, which I think is just as important as where they get stored. All right, should we keep walking? All right, Bureau Valet. former L'Occitane. One of the most unique boats in the fleet, definitely, for a ton of reasons. The most exaggerated spatula in the bow. All in all, it's not as beamy as it looks at the end of the day. The foil system is radically different. You get the shaft exiting high. You get the center of effort, center of lift farther from the boat with this kind of, spoon-shaped foil, you want to call it. The deck itself is super sleek and flush. There's a lot of things to like about this boat. We saw this boat in the Ocean Race Europe, and I think they'd had their hands on it for about 5 minutes, and we're hitting some pretty amazing speeds on that reach, off of Qashqai. So, just like us, I think they're just scratching the surface. All right, we go. And Chiral. GPLP design changed a lot over the last 4 years, I'd say. With this boat and a PV, we're probably the strongest boats over the quad, you would say. Swapping winds in a lot of areas. You can see they're doing some experimentation with the bow there, not only with the spatula, but with the flare, something we've seen a little bit of in the Cup. It's kind of the first of the generation that's a little bit more conservative, but doesn't have a lot of weaknesses. It always seems to be there. It's well sailed, and doesn't seem to stand out at any particular point of sail or have any particular weaknesses per se. They've done a nice job with this boat. If you're walking the dock, or if you're watching the media content coming off the boats, you're basically looking for three big things. You're looking for the hull shape, the lines, what the naval architects are trying to achieve with those lines. We look at the foils, it's the same types of things. What does the tip look like? What does the shaft look like? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to optimize for? And then I think the third thing is the aero package, like the total aero package as it comes to what the parent wind sees when it meets the platform, but then also the sails. I think different geometries, different shapes, end plating concepts. I think there's a lot there, and I think this class is just kind of scratching the surface when it comes to the aero stuff.
Philosophically speaking, kind of a last question. I think the Imocas are proud of the way that they sometimes look, hot dogging around with the bow in the air and the foils, but talk just for a second about the priority of averages,
particularly when you're sailing shorthanded, it's about the averages, because you can't consistently push the boat at 100% all the time. You can certainly push yourself at 100% all the time, but that doesn't necessarily translate to 100% performance for the platform. So I think finding boats that are easy to sail and can kind of consistently clock these high averages is much better than boats that might be able to go out there and rip off a max speed. For instance. So I think you're trying to set up for stable flight, not high flight, not, all the sexy time pictures that we see on the internet. I think it's, boats that are just kind of chipping away, doing their work slowly are the boats that are going to end up in the front.
Cool. Thank you, Charlie. That was very informative.
Maybe too informative.
Maybe, possibly. We shall see.
All right, au revoir. Cool.